So good morning. Thank you to Maya Hoffman and Luma Foundation, and also to Bart for inviting me here, for having us here. I might have to warn you. I'm not going to talk about curatorial modes, but rather out of them. The valley is steep, the light cold. A dusting of snow covers the rocks and the frozen earth. The people attending the spectacle are wearing warm clothes. A few brought umbrellas. Bright colors puncture the otherwise brownish or grayish rows of folks lined up on top of the huts. The huts are nestled on the declivity as if wanting to extract from the earth all its inner warmth, while using the hillside as a protective shield against the wind and cold. It won't be better during summer, only different. This is a landscape given to extremes. The nested village houses, built from the very material on which they sit, are connected by narrow pathways. The sedimentation of passages rounds off the architecture's general geometry. The big windows with their resilient blue or green wooden frames could pass for the mountain's eyes, so organically aligned are architecture and environment. A few wooden poles puncture the organic slope. They hint at a world beyond this particular habitat. These former trees are carrying now electric cables, the gradient angle of which underscores the steepness of the hillside. Viewed against the background of the people contemplating the spectacle, the black cables correspond to staff lines drawn in an improvisatory fashion, perhaps in the haste of inspiration, with a few notes penned in, like here in Theodor Adorno's diatribe against vocalists who at the beginning of Brahms' song Auf dem Kirchhof use their voice as an instrument. If the black cables were indeed staff lines and the heads of the people notes, what music, what song would we listen to? In a theory of musical reproduction, a book project undertaken roughly at the time Walter Benjamin embarked on his famous study on photography, Adorno advocates the ideal of mute music. Listening, in other words, is not an option. Essentially, the music plays in your head. Adorno's argument takes, of course, issue with the cultural industry and its corrupting influence on musical performance, at least partly. But he also quotes, approvingly, the music historian Frederick Dorian, who claimed, quote, "There are certain intangibles that cannot be expressed by our method of writing music. Vital musical elements incapable of being fixed by the marks and symbols of notation." These intangibles, or vital musical elements, are not chance encounters. They cannot be programmed either. They depend on a heightened state of attention. Musical reproduction, in this regard, is not about realizing a piece. According to Adorno, the performance functions as a particular kind of photograph, an X-ray photograph of the very piece to be performed. The work, in other words, reveals itself in its immateriality. Notation wants, and this is again Adorno, that music, echo of animistic shivers, be forgotten in order to fix and ding it. And he speculates, was every note once an image of a blow and then of violence itself? Cutting off the heads of the people on the photograph, something I did for the sake of universal analogy, is perhaps less a symptom of my sadistic imagination. It exposes the truth of a notational system. We cannot be certain about the spectacle we are witnessing. Witnessing is even a euphemism. Something is going on. This much is certain. Something that attracts considerable attention. But what exactly is going on is anybody's guess. And while we keep looking at this image, we begin to reach through it. The people on the other side are not looking at us. They look at something that escapes our vision, much to the same degree that our event is escaping theirs. There's a reciprocity to be detected in these exchanges of looks that miss each other, but by missing each other, share an event. The photograph provides us with an inaccurate replication of our viewing position, allowing at the same time for an extension of our look and a denial of our vision. Is this what Adorno had in mind when he claimed, quote, that every true reproduction is the imitation of a non-existent original? After this short prelude, in which I submitted one single image to the virtues and perhaps limitations of close reading, I want to examine now a few traits, all related to the precarious path of universal analogy, a few traits of the visual environment in which photography appears. You are by now familiar with Family of Man and its particular mode of address. No matter if the encounter envisioned by the exhibition's formal organization is empirically happening or not. By virtue of the exhibition's program, the viewer gets introduced to a constellation of possible, that is inaccurately mirrored, selves. He or she, or even the whole family, is receiving a call. Go out of yourself. The terms possible and inaccurately point to a conceptual gray zone in which subtle negotiations about the psychic nature of these selves take time and place. This process of the self's immersion in the non-self is essentially a matter of remembrance, or more dramatically even, the true domain of unconscious memories, in which a whole repertory of forms lies in slumber. But Family of Man was far from advocating an uncontrollable breakdown of the boundaries of selfhood. Like every remarkable exhibition, it enticed its viewers with the prospect of an exceptional self-expansion, a kind of celebration of the self as world. But it kept the flow of narcissistic jouissance within a display defined by a rigid architectural layout cum categorical order. I have to say that that those images are cropped. Can we correct this easily? Yeah, danke. So, thank you. Defined by a rigid architectural layout, cum categorical order. Exhibition shot number 2 stems from Documenta, an art exhibition that took place in 1955 in Kassel as an artistic supplement to the Federal Garden Show, a state-subsidized exhibition event aimed at poor regions in order to boost the local economy and infrastructure. Documenta in 1955 was never meant to have a sequel. The show roughly coincided with Family of Man, shown in the autumn of '55 in Berlin, before it embarked on its global tour. Similarities between both exhibitions' systems of display are no mere coincidence, but point to common roots in experimental approaches to exhibition design developed in the 20s, 30s, and 40s by, among others, Frederick Kiesler, Elie Sitzky, Lili Reich, and Herbert Bayer. The foyer of the Museum Fridericianum, Documenta's sole venue in 1955, displayed faces of the artists of the exhibition, most of which were forced to leave Germany after being branded as degenerate or were killed by the Nazis, like Otto Freundlich. But unlike the viewing situation conceived for Family of Man, Documenta didn't allow for much negotiation among possible selves. In what amounts to a moral gesture, the viewer was forced into a one-to-one encounter with the expressive power of the artist's face, the latter betraying the intimacy or vulnerability of a soul laid bare, while simultaneously revealing the great mystery at the core of human subjectivity, the great unknown, for which the individual artist served and serves and ever will serve as a stand-in. Documenta was no photo exhibition. It didn't even consider photography to be an artistic medium proper, although photography was welcome in its slavish adherence to the phenomenological facts of the exhibition. Documenta's wager in 1955 was form, not form per se, but form conceived in terms of the universal language of abstraction. Consequently, the viewer, after having passed the foyer with the artist's faces, was experiencing not only the relative disintegration of the human face, but also of his or her sense of self, and therefore of the established ground for negotiations with non-selves. As if to counter this potentially psychotic experience, in which the communication of forms was at risk, the display made heavy use of anthropomorphic traits. The De Chirico, for example, displays no intention to wait for a viewer to approach the wall or leave the gallery, but rather meets him or her halfway in a space thus emphatically shared by both parties. We cut now to another modernist exhibition of the same period, an exhibition which, like Family of Man and Documenta, was based on the universal hope or promise of all for man, although this one took place outside of the Western world. I am referring to the 5th Biennial of São Paulo in 1959, or more precisely, to an exhibition that was institutionally part of the Biennale, but chose to speak another language, at least to a degree, and comes very close to what Ariella declared to be a new genre, the declarative exhibition. Bahia, no Ibirapuera, this was the exhibition's title, Bahia in Ibirapuera, was organized by Lina Bo Bardi and Martim Gonçalves with the idea of laying proof to the creative resources of the Brazilian Northeast, one of the poorest regions in all South America. It was Bahia and its capital Salvador through which the Portuguese engineered the slave trade from the mid-15th century on, shipping about 5 million West Africans to work on the sugar plantations, which caused not only human but also an ecological catastrophe and created a huge wasteland. To make propaganda for this local wasteland in the framework of a universal exhibition was a political move directed against the utopian fantasies of Brazil's modernist elites. In Bo Bardi's view, these elites were acting in open denial of the country's feudal structures, which in return were a result of centuries of disruptive colonial rule. For Bo Bardi, who had emigrated to Brazil in 1947, leaving behind Italy, where she had received her architectural education during Mussolini's reign, Bahia and its people not only signaled a raw creative force, but also a form of integrity. Having witnessed from close by how Italian fascism had perverted popular culture by petrifying it as folklore, Bo Bardi was well aware of the possible risk of romanticizing Bahia. She took the risk. But what curatorial ways, not to talk about methods, are there to present such a force? How to make the latter productive instead of just representing it? What do you put on display if your subject, to a degree at least, is immaterial in substance? What objects, what images are capable to convey this force? Or am I already on the wrong track by asking these questions? No object, no image might possibly do. Better leave the space empty. Bo Bardi framed her undertaking like this, quote, to carefully search for the cultural basis of a country, whatever they may be, poor, miserable, popular, when they are real, does not mean to preserve the forms and materials. It means to evaluate the original creative possibilities, unquote. Her method was thus an evaluation. The Bahia exhibition was local with a vengeance, much to the same degree the Biennale was internationalist. Among the artifacts displayed by Bo Bardi were life-size statuettes of Orisha spirits, musical instruments, patchwork quilts made of reclaimed scraps of leftover cloth, fifos or oil lamps built from empty medicine bottles, and pieces of tin plates, carancas or figureheads from riverboats of the São Francisco, ceramics, mats, hammocks, earthenware pans, pots for drinking water, and so on. Bo Bardi called the artifacts, most of which were made out of garbage, objects of desperate survival. The space of presentation was structured by open form, a system of freestanding walls, most of them elevated on pedestals in the shape of white cubes. The rather compact wall provided conspicuously solid support for the handcrafted objects, which were all in all either rude or tiny and brittle. While the elevated walls were colored in different shades, one particular wall was covered with gold leaf as is to mirror the spiritual radiance of the religious sculpture displayed in front of it. The ex-votos, on the other hand, were directly fixed onto a whitewashed brick wall, thus creating a strong correspondence between the bareness of the wall and the wooden rawness of the sculpture. A few artificial trees were planted here and there, one adorned with weather vanes, while the entire floor was covered with pitanga leaves. Photographs by Pierre Verger demonstrating the function of certain objects in the rituals of Macumba and Candomblé were mounted on a highly provisional and fragile wooden scaffolding. It's hard to detect on this photograph, but it looks almost like a caricature of the display used by Steichen, on a highly provisional and fragile wooden scaffolding. In the background, before the row of orishas, the exhibition was sealed off by a huge long curtain. This exhibition was not your typical art exhibition. Neither was it an ethnographic show. And yet, it somehow pertained to both, for its capacity to switch registers. Contrary to ethnographic exhibitions, there was almost no information, no disciplinary framework that could help the viewer to overcome the strangeness of these objects by putting them in their proper place by knowing them. Yet, the objects were unmistakably familiar. They were artifacts or craft. By withholding context information, Bo Bardi's display enabled the objects to contextualize themselves. Even more so, for proposing a relational system not based on knowledge, she cunningly appropriated, even vampirized, modern art's claim for aesthetic autonomy from the universalist biennial next door, and thus visually couched the local artifacts in those terms, making them glow in their non-referential beauty. Bahia no Ibirapuera was thus conceived as a transition area, a stage set in favor of a subjective mode of perception in which the actual object is contemplated in reverse motion, as if remembering its origins. Indeed, for Bo Bardi, perfect reversibility, the potential for radical transformation, was the sign of genuine popular art, while irreversibility pointed to folklore or kitsch or death. As I was asked by the organizers of this exhibition, of this conference, for this Freudian slip, as I was asked by the organizers of this conference to comment specifically on latter-day forms on universalism, I cannot help to end on a few comments on a recent exhibition that was partly conceived as an assault on the universal exhibition and on the and on the unity of being, and for which I'm partly to blame. Documenta 12. I will constrain myself to one particular constellation in the Aue Pavilion, where 3 different works were shown side by side. David Goldblatt's photo series, The Transported from Juan de Bele from '83, a variety of bridal veils called Rubans from the 19th century, and John McCracken's mandala painting, Kapai, from 1970. Goldblatt documented the daily journey of black South Africans between work and their home during apartheid. Bent to the outskirts of the cities, black people had to spend a major part of their sleeping hours traveling, making exhaustion a permanent bodily condition. Goldblatt visualizes the effects of this cruel technology of government with a number of photographic ploys. The recurrence of similar scenes emphasizes the repetitive daily drudgery. The graininess of the atmospheric image melts sleeping bodies into an almost amorphous mass. Light and shadow are used to merge early morning and late night, adding a dreamlike quality to the shots. The blurring of movement dissolves the boundaries of the human figure and its surroundings, turning the body into a cipher of bare life. Yet Goldblatt's is not a dehumanizing look. Though he refuses to take a redemptive point of view, he shows a people beaten and repressed. He still claims that this is a people. The Rubens are bridal veils made by Ismaili Islamic Shiite women belonging to the mountain tribes in the Pamir region of Tajikistan. The colorful silk embroidery depicts animals, symbols of fertility, and abstract patterns. Their function was to cover the bride's head and torso during her passage from the place of ceremony to her husband's house. Afterwards, the ruband would serve as a decorative wall hanging until the oldest daughter had occasion to wear it. A tiny latticed opening defines and frames the bride's field of vision. Any discourse on the veil needs historical and regional precision, bound up as the social practice is with patriarchy, fundamentalism, colonialism, and modernity. But it seems within reason to make the following generalizing remark. One of the functions of the veil is to visualize male ownership over the female body, and, in this context, the veil can be seen as part of the gaze. The limiting of the female field of vision by a fabric frame signifies who gets to see and defines what is to be seen and who is there to be seen, never mind the covering of body parts. McCracken's psychedelic mandala paintings are fallout from the Californian Summer of Love. They constitute one of the very few idiosyncratic digressions from his streamlined sculptural oeuvre. Esoteric currents, by the way, have been an integral part of modern abstraction. But what to make of the correlation between those three works? Ruband and Kappai share the application of an abstract pattern of primary colors on white background. The formal similarity is, of course, nonsensical. It is idiotic. It doesn't get you anywhere. It is nevertheless striking and acts as a central hook for the viewer. In contrast, the bridal veil and Goldblatt's photographs have no formal relation at all. Both do, however, address the dialectics of visibility within a set of power relations. Both mark a passage, once and for all, or so the powers that be would have it. A passage deemed to fix the human subject in a position of subservience, relegated to invisibility, or more precisely, to an appearance in a field of vision determined solely by others. This kind of speculation could, of course, go on and on. But basically, the migration of form is neither a question of formal analogies nor of substantive resemblances, although these two play, of course, a part. It is a passage, a precarious passage of a human subject. Thank you.